November 19th, 1940. 15,000 feet above the Sidi Barrani sector, Egypt. The air up here is thin, cold and deceptively clean. At 15,000 feet, the war usually smells like cordite and high-octane aviation fuel. But today, for Capitano Giorgio Rossi, it smells like victory. Rossi shifts in the open cockpit of his Fiat CR42 Falco. The wind hammers against his leather flight helmet, a constant deafening roar that vibrates through his bones. Unlike the British in their claustrophobic, heated hurricanes, Rossi is part of the elements. He can feel the slipstream on his cheeks. He can lean his head out over the side of the fuselage and look down at the endless, undulating sea of beige and ochre below. The Western Desert, a place where there is nowhere to hide, and yet the British seem incapable of finding anything. To his right, floating off his wingtip like a silver hawk suspended on an invisible wire, is his wingman, Tenente Bruno. The bright sun glints off the upper wing of Bruno's biplane. They are flying a loose hunting formation, confident, relaxed, almost arrogant. They are the Regia Aeronautica, the Royal Italian Air Force, and in the autumn of 1940, they own the skies over North Africa. Rossi adjusts his goggles and scans the horizon. He is not just a pilot. In his own mind, he is a cavalryman of the clouds. His aircraft, the CR-42, is a beautiful anachronism. It is a biplane in a world rapidly turning to monoplanes. But it is fast, incredibly agile, and in the hands of a veteran like Rossi, it is a scalpel. He loves this machine. He trusts it. He knows that if he gets into a turning fight, a real dogfight, a test of nerve and muscle, no British machine can turn inside him. Patrol to leader, the radio crackles, the voice tinny and distorted by static. Specs at 2 o'clock low, probably gladiators. Rossi looks. He squints against the glare of the Mediterranean sun. There they are. 3 dark distinct dots moving sluggishly against the backdrop of the desert hardpan. He smiles beneath his oxygen mask. The British are flying in a Vic formation, a tight, V-shaped wedge. It is a parade ground formation, a relic of the First World War that the RAF simply refuses to abandon. They are bunching up, their pilots spending more time looking at each other's wingtips to avoid a collision than scanning the sky for predators. They are blind. They are disciplined, certainly, but they are predictable. And in the killing grounds of the air, predictability is a death sentence. Rossi taps the throttle. The Fiat's radial engine growls, a throaty, rhythmic percussion. He doesn't dive immediately. He waits. He watches. This is the sport of it, the psychological dominance. He wants to see if they spot him. They don't. The British flight continues on its plodding course, oblivious to the hawks circling 3,000 feet above them. They have no radar to warn them here. No controllers watching screens in a dark room. They are relying on the Mark I eyeball, and right now they are looking the wrong way. Attack formation, Rossi signals. Let's wake them up. He pushes the stick forward. The nose of the Falco drops and the horizon leaps up to meet him. The airspeed indicator winds up 250, 280, 300 kilometers per hour. The wind noise changes pitch, rising to a scream. The wires bracing his wings sing a deadly harmony. As he dives, Rossi feels the familiar compression of gravity. He lines up the trailing aircraft in the British formation. It's a Gloucester Gladiator, another biplane, the British equivalent of his own mount, but heavier, slower, less elegant. He holds his fire. Not yet, not yet. He wants to be close enough to see the rivets, close enough to see the pilot turn his head in sudden, sheer panic. At 200 metres, the British pilot finally notices the shadow falling over him. The Gladiator jerks hard to the left, breaking formation. Too late. Rossi squeezes the trigger on the control column. The twin Breeder Safat machine guns mounted on the engine, cowling, erupt. The airframe shudders as the heavy 12.7mm rounds tear through the space between the two planes. He sees the tracer rounds, bright, burning streaks, stitch a line across the Gladiator's upper wing and fuselage. Fabric rips, wood splinters. Rossi doesn't wait to see the fire. He hauls back on the stick, pulling the CR-42 into a brutal vertical climb. The G-force slams him into his seat. his vision greying at the edges, but the aircraft responds instantly. He loops over the top, trading speed for altitude, looking down at the chaos he has created. The British formation has shattered. They are scattering like frightened quail. And now, the Italians begin their dance. This is what they live for: the mischia, the mix-up, the dogfight. Rossi rolls inverted and dives again. He watches his squadron mates engage. It is a chaotic, swirling melee of looping aircraft. There is no central control, no tactical coordination beyond the initial attack. It is every man for himself, a duel of individual skill. And here, the Italians excel. He sees a gladiator trying to turn inside Tenente Bruno. A foolish mistake. The Fiat CR-42 has a turning radius that defies physics. Bruno cuts his throttle, drops his flaps, and pivots the aircraft on a dime. The British pilot, unable to match the turn, overshoots, sliding right in front of Bruno's guns. A short burst, and smoke begins to trail from the British engine. Rossi laughs. It feels too easy. They are mocking the British aircraft, flying circles around them, teasing them with feints and snap rolls. It isn't just war, it is a performance. "Go home, little Englishman," Rossi shouts into the cockpit, though no one but the wind can hear him. "Go home and learn to fly." The engagement lasts only 5 minutes. The British, realising they are outclassed in this twisting, turning knife fight, dive for the deck, pushing their engines to the limit to escape back to their lines. Rossi considers chasing them, but he checks his fuel gauge. He has made his point. He wobbles his wings, the signal to regroup. One by one, the silver biplanes of the Regia Aeronautica climb back up to the sanctuary of the high altitude. They form up, victorious, untouched. As they turn back toward their base at El Adem, Rossi looks back at the empty sky. He feels invincible. He believes that this is how the war will be fought until the end. Night against night, skill against skill, with the desert as their arena. He believes that the pilot with the steadiest hand and the bravest heart will always win. He has no idea that the rules are about to change. He has no idea that down below, across the wire in Egypt, men with slide rules and cathode ray tubes are preparing to strip the romance out of the sky and replace it with cold, hard calculus. Tonight, Rossi will drink Chianti in the mess tent and toast to the manoeuvrability of the Fiat. He will joke about the clumsiness of the RAF. He does not know that he is a dinosaur, standing on the edge of extinction, watching the meteor fall. December 4th, 1940. A forward landing ground near Martin Barghoush, Egypt. The heat does not simply sit on you, it possesses you. Pilot Officer Arthur "Artie" West wipes a greasy mixture of sweat and fine Saharan dust from his forehead, only to have it replaced instantly. He sits in the cockpit of his Hawker Hurricane Mark I, the metal skin of the aircraft so hot it would blister bare skin. The Merlin engine is silent for now, but the cockpit smells of stale glycol and scorched rubber. Artie stares out through the armoured windscreen at the shimmering horizon. Somewhere out there, the Italians are flying. Somewhere out there, they are laughing. "Anything, Artie?" The voice comes from his wingman, Flying Officer Stuffy Miller, standing on the wing of his own Hurricane 10 yards away. Stuffy is squinting into the blinding white glare of the afternoon sun, his hand shielding his eyes. "Nothing but heat haze and flies, Stuffy," Artie grumbles, his voice raspy. This is the reality of the Desert Air Force in the early days, the standing patrol. It is an exercise in futility and exhaustion. Because the British have no way of knowing when or where the Italians will strike, they are forced to keep fighters in the air or on cockpit readiness for hours at a time. They are burning fuel, wearing out engines already choked by sand, and draining the nerves of pilots who are essentially playing a game of blind man's bluff across thousands of square miles of featureless sand. A crackle of static erupts from the radio headset dangling near Artie's ear. He grabs it, pressing the leather cups to his head. "Fighter control to Blue Flight. Report. The call control is a joke." It's a man in a tent miles away, relying on reports from ground observers who are often looking through binoculars at dust clouds. "Blue leader here," Artie says into the mask. "Nothing to report. Sky is clear. We're at bingo fuel in 20 minutes. "Blue leader, be advised. Army reports engine noises to your west. Sector 4 Baker, investigate. Engine noises. Artie sighs. That could be a column of trucks, a lone reconnaissance plane, or a ghost. He signals to Stuffy, who scrambles into his seat. With a violent whine of the starter motor and a sudden coughing roar that sends a cloud of grit backward, the Merlin engine comes to life. As they taxi out, the Hurricanes kick up a localised sandstorm. The Vokes air filters, the bulky, chin-like protrusions under the nose, struggle to keep the grit from tearing the engine's internals to pieces. By the time Artie and Stuffy are airborne and climbing through the thick, heavy air of the lower altitudes, they are already behind. At 6,000 feet, the desert becomes a flat, abstract painting. There are no landmarks, no roads, no steeples, no rivers, just the blue and the brown. If you lose your bearings for a moment, you are lost forever. Artie scans the sky. He does it the way he was taught. Divide the sky into segments, focus on a point, then move. But the sun is his enemy. It sits high and white, a blinding hole in the sky. He knows that's where they'll be. Rossi and his knights don't fly fair, they fly smart. They lurk in the eye of God, waiting for the British to look away. Stuffy, stay close, Artie commands. They're out here. For 40 minutes, they search. They orbit empty patches of sand. They chase shadows cast by clouds that aren't there. The Hurricane is a superior machine to the Fiat biplanes in almost every measurable way. It's faster, it has 8 Browning machine guns instead of 2, and it's rugged. But a Hurricane that can't find its target is just an expensive glider. Then it happens. Artie doesn't see a plane. He sees a flash, a momentary glint of reflected light, like a mirror being flicked in his eyes. It's high, 10 o'clock. Brake left, Artie screams into the radio. He yanks the stick over, the Hurricane's heavy wings rolling the world sideways. A split second later, the space where he had been a moment ago is laced with tracers. 2 Fiat Suata R42s scream past. Their engines are high-pitched snarl. They had dived from the sun, perfectly timed, perfectly executed. I can't see them, Stuffy cries out. Where did they go? They're climbing, Artie shouts, pulling his nose up. But the Hurricane is a heavy beast. It has momentum. But at these lower speeds, the light Italian biplanes are like dragonflies. Rossi, or someone just like him, is already pulling into a tight climbing turn that Artie simply cannot match. He watches the Italian aircraft pivot, its wings catching the light as it effortlessly gains the perch once again. Artie tries to bring his guns to bear, but the Italian pilot is dancing. Every time Artie thinks he has a lead, the Fiat flips or rolls, using its low wing loading to stay just outside the Hurricane's crosshairs. They're mocking us, Artie mutters, his teeth clenched. The Italians aren't even trying to stay for a sustained fight. They hit, they climb, they taunt. They know the British are low on fuel. They know the British are frustrated. Another pair of Fiats appears from nowhere, diving on Stuffy. Artie tries to intercept, but his Hurricane feels sluggish in the thin, hot air. He fires a desperate burst at long range, the 8 machine guns vibrating the entire airframe. But the Italian pilot simply rolls inverted and dives away, the tracers passing harmlessly through empty air. The radio is a mess of frantic shouting and static. There is no coordination. There is no one telling Artie that there are actually 6 more Italians orbiting 5 miles to the north, waiting to cut off his retreat. He is fighting a local war in a bubble of ignorance. Blue Flight, return to base, the voice from the tent crackles. Fuel state critical. Artie looks at his gauge. He has no choice. He watches the Italian planes, elegant, nimble, and infuriating, as they level off a few thousand feet above him. They don't follow. They don't need to. They've won this round without even losing a drop of sweat. As the Hurricanes limp back toward Martin-Bargouche, Artie feels a burning sense of humiliation. It isn't just that the Italians are good pilots, it's that the British are fighting with their hands tied behind their backs. They are reacting to an enemy that always seems to know where they are, while they themselves are searching for needles in a haystack the size of a continent. Landing back at the strip, Artie kills the engine. The silence that follows is heavy. He climbs out, his flying suit soaked through, and drops to the sand. We're going to lose this way, Stuffy says, leaning against his fuselage, his face pale. We can't just keep wandering around up there, Artie. We're exhausted before the fight even starts. Artie looks toward the western horizon. Somewhere out there, the Italians are landing too, probably opening bottles of wine. We need eyes, Artie says softly, kicking at the dust. We need eyes that can see further than we can. Otherwise, we're just targets. He doesn't know it yet, but a few miles behind the lines, a group of men in Royal Air Force uniforms are uncrating long, strange-looking wooden poles and massive coils of copper wire. They are about to give Artie his eyes. The desert is supposed to be silent at night, but inside the buried command trailer of AMES, Air Ministry Experimental Station, Unit 21, the air hums with a low-frequency electrical throb. It is a sound that feels out of place, an industrial pulse in a land of ancient dust. Sergeant Ted Jenkins wipes a smudge of grease from his forehead, leaving a dark streak that matches the bags under his eyes. He is hunched over a circular glass screen, a cathode ray tube that glows with an eerie, sickly green light. This is his world. While the pilots like Artie West are scouring the vast horizon for physical shapes, Ted is looking for ghosts. "Coming up on the sweep now," Ted mutters, his voice a dry rasp. He adjusts a brass dial. Outside, atop a rickety wooden tower braced by steel cables against the howling Khamsin winds, a massive rectangular antenna rotates with a mechanical groan. It sends out invisible pulses of radio energy, pulses that travel at the speed of light, bouncing off the metal skins of aircraft and returning to this cramped, sweltering box. A thin, bright line sweeps around the screen like the hand of a clock. As it passes the 10 o'clock position, a jagged spike of light, a blip, erupts on the horizontal baseline. "Got one," Ted says, his posture straightening. "No, wait, 2, 3, a whole cluster." He isn't looking at planes. He is looking at radar echoes. To the uninitiated, it looks like a glitch in the machine. To Ted, it is a formation of Italian aircraft taking off from their base at Gambut, nearly 100 miles away, target bearing 285 degrees. Estimated range, 95 miles. Strength, heavy. Behind Ted, a young officer named Flight Lieutenant Miller stands over a large wooden table covered in a map of the Egyptian coast. The map is divided into a grid, the British grid system, that turns the chaotic desert into a mathematical coordinate plane. "Plot it, Ted," Miller says, his voice calm but urgent. Ted uses a pair of calipers to measure the distance on his screen and shouts out the coordinates. A plotter, a WAF, Women's Auxiliary Air Force member or a fellow airman, uses a long wooden rod to slide a small plastic marker across the table. The marker has a number on it, representing the altitude and the number of aircraft. This was the birth of a new kind of warfare. For the first time in the history of the desert, the fog of war was being burned away by a green glow. The Italians were no longer invisible. They were data points. But the technology is temperamental. The desert heat causes the delicate vacuum tubes to overheat and pop with a smell of ozone. The fine Saharan sand, like a microscopic abrasive, finds its way into every gear and switch. Ted has to spend half his shift cleaning contacts with methylated spirits just to keep the eye open. "The Italians think they're clever," Miller says, watching the markers move across the map. "They think they can loiter in the sun and wait for our boys to get tired. They don't realise we're watching them from the moment they warm up their engines." This is the fighter control system, the Dowding system, transplanted from the green fields of England to the brown wastes of Africa. It's a chain of information. The radar, AMs, detects the enemy. The filter room verifies the data to weed out friendly echoes. The operations room visualises the battle on the plotting table. The controller radios the pilots to give them the intercept. It is a revolutionary concept. Instead of sending Artie West and his squadron up on standing patrols to waste fuel and energy, the RAF can now keep their planes on the ground, engines cold, until the very last second. "Phone's ringing," Ted says, nodding toward the field telephone on the wall. Miller picks it up. It's the forward landing ground at Martin Bargush, Artie's base. "This is Matro Control," Miller says into the mouthpiece. "We have hostiles incoming. 40 plus, Vector 280. Scramble all available COBs. I repeat, scramble." Miles away, Artie West hears the alarm bell ring. He doesn't have to wonder where the enemy is. He doesn't have to squint at the sun. He jumps into his Hurricane, knowing that a voice in his ear is going to lead him directly to the kill. But back in the dugout, Ted watches the green line sweep again. The blips are moving fast. The Italians are still using their old tactics, flying in loose, arrogant circles, confident in their invisibility. "They have no idea," Ted whispers, his eyes reflected in the green glass. "They think the sky is empty." He watches as a new set of blips appears on the screen. The British Hurricanes, rising to meet the threat. On the screen, The two groups of light are crawling toward each other. It looks like a game of chess played with sparks. The era of the night of the air is ending. The era of the system has begun. December 18th, 1940, 12,000 feet over the Katara. Depression. Blue Leader, this is Maitru Control. Your vector is 295. I say again, 295. You are currently in grid square, zebra 4. Over. Artie West adjusts his oxygen mask, his thumb hovering over the transmit button on the throttle quadrant. The radio is a symphony of whistles, crackles, and the rhythmic thump-thump of atmospheric interference. Control, Blue Leader. I have nothing but sand and more sand. Are you sure about that, Vector? If I stay on this heading, I'll be halfway to Tripoli by tea time. In the cockpit, Artie is wrestling with more than just the flight controls. He is wrestling with skepticism. To a pilot who learned to fly by the seat of his pants, the idea of a man in a tent 60 miles away telling him where to turn feels unnatural. It feels like being a marionette on a string. But the string is the only thing keeping him from being hopelessly lost. In the Western Desert, there are no landmarks. No turn left at the cathedral or follow the railway line. From 2 miles up, the world is a monochromatic void. To solve this, the RAF has draped an invisible mathematical net over the wasteland, the desert grid, a system where the map is divided into large lettered squares, further subdivided into numbered quadrants. It allows a controller to pinpoint a location without using names that don't exist on any map. Blue Leader, trust the vector, Miller's voice comes through, calmer than the static surrounding it. We have a pipsqueak fix on you. You're exactly where you need to be. Artie glances at a small ticking clockwork device on his instrument panel. This is the pipsqueak. Every minute, it automatically switches his radio to transmit for 14 seconds. During those 14 seconds, ground stations at different locations listen to his signal and use direction finding, D/F, to triangulate his exact position. It is a clever, desperate bit of engineering. It means the ground knows where Artie is, even when Artie doesn't. Contact in 4 minutes, Miller says. Angels 15. They're higher than you, Artie. Bring them up. Artie looks at his altimeter. 12,000 feet. He pulls the boost override and the Hurricane's engine gives a low, guttural growl as the manifold pressure rises. The aircraft vibrates with newfound energy, clawing for the sky. The friction of this new system isn't just technical, it's psychological. The pilots feel the loss of their independence. In the early days, you found the enemy, you fought the enemy, and you came home a hero. Now you are a component in a machine. You are a sensor platform. The problem, radio sets, TR-9D, are short-range and prone to skip in the desert heat. The conflict. Controllers often give directions based on radar data that is 2 or 3 minutes old. A lifetime in a dogfight. The fear. If the radio fails, the pilot is effectively blind and lost in a landscape that kills the unprepared. Control, I'm at Angels 14, Artie reports, his eyes scanning the empty blue. Still nothing. Are you sure they haven't slipped past? Steady, Blue Leader. They're there. Square Zebra 9. They're flying in a wide circle. They think they're waiting for a convoy. Artie's heart hammers against his ribs. He wants to believe the voice. He needs to believe it. If Miller is right, Artie is currently positioned perfectly in the blind spot of an Italian patrol. If Miller is wrong, Artie is burning through his precious fuel for nothing, leaving his base undefended. Suddenly, the static clears for a brief crystalline second. Blue Leader, look up and 10 o'clock, now. Artie cranes his neck, looking through the heavy canopy glass. There, shimmering against the deep indigo of the high-altitude sky, are tiny silver specks. They are tiny, like dust motes on a lens, but they are moving. They are circling. They are exactly where Miller said they would be. The grid has worked. The invisible net has caught its first real prey. For the first time, Artie isn't reacting to an attack. He is the one stalking. He looks down at his hands, the knuckles white around the spade grip. He isn't a knight anymore. He is a hunter, guided by a ghost in a headset. Control, I have tally-ho, Artie whispers, the adrenaline finally washing away the doubt, confirming 9 Fiats. They haven't seen us. Happy hunting, Blue Leader, Miller replies. We're watching you on the board. Artie clicks his gun heater on. The net is tight. The trap is closed. Now all that's left is the strike. December 19th, 1940. 0945 hours. Inside the filter room, RAF Heliopolis. The atmosphere inside the operations room is nothing like the frantic, windswept air of the desert landing grounds. Here, buried beneath layers of protective sandbags and reinforced concrete, it is cool, dim, and smells intensely of floor wax and cigarettes. On the giant table below the balcony, the desert has been reduced to a canvas of wood and paint. There are no individual stories here, only tracks. Track 22, Track 45. To the controllers, these are not men in cockpits, they are vectors of probability. Flight Lieutenant Miller stands on the balcony, his hands gripping the railing. He looks down at the plotters, the airmen and WAFs who move the wooden blocks with long, magnetised poles. Track 12 is crossing the wire, a plotter announces, sliding a red block across the border from Libya into Egypt. Strength 20 plus, altitude 12,000, speed 180 knots. Miller checks his watch. This is the moment they have been engineering for weeks. This isn't a defensive scramble. It is a ground-controlled interception, GCY ambush. Over the last few days, the British have intentionally kept their fighters low and infrequent, leaking the impression that the RAF is crippled and demoralised. It was a lure, and today the Regia Aeronautica has taken the bait. 300 miles to the west, Capitano Giorgio Rossi is leading the Italian circus. He is at the head of a massive formation, 24 Fiat CR-42s from the 4th Stormo, the elite of the Italian Air Force. They are flying in a wide, sweeping arc over the British lines. Rossi is bored. He is so confident in his invisibility that he has allowed his formation to loosen. Some of his younger pilots are practicing shadowboxing, rolling their aircraft and performing mock dogfights in the empty air to pass the time. "Look at them," Rossi says over the radio, gesturing to the empty desert below. "The British have gone to ground like desert rats. They are afraid of the sun." Rossi believes he is the master of his domain. He has checked his 6 o'clock position every 30 seconds, scanning the sky for the glint of a hurricane. He sees nothing but the blue. He doesn't realise that 40 miles away, a radar beam has already painted his fuselage, and that every turn he makes is being recorded on a wooden table in a basement in Cairo. Back in the filter room, Miller watches the red blocks move. "They're heading for the fuel dumps at Solich," Miller says. "They're expecting us to intercept them from the east, with the sun in our eyes. It's their favourite trick." He turns to the radio operator. "Tell Blue Flight and Red Flight to stay at Angel 5. Hide them in the ground clutter. I want them to stay below the horizon until I give the word." This is the trap. In the early days, the British would climb to meet the enemy, giving their position away with engine smoke and silhouettes against the sky. Now Miller is using the terrain of the air. By keeping his hurricanes low, he ensures they are invisible against the dark mottled brown of the desert floor. The Italians, looking up for threats or scanning the horizon, will miss the sharks swimming in the shadows below them. "Blue Leader, this is Matru Control," Miller speaks into the headset. "The guests are 10 miles north of your position. They are high and happy. Do not, I repeat, do not climb yet. Maintain grid square, X-ray 7. In his cockpit, Artie West is sweating. He is flying at 5,000 feet, his hurricane bumping in the turbulent, hot air rising from the dunes. He wants to climb. Every instinct he has tells him to get the perch, the altitude advantage. But the voice in his ear is firm. "Stay low, Artie," Miller's voice comes through, almost hypnotic. "Wait for the turn." On the radar screen back at Matru, the two tracks are now converging. The red blocks, the Italians, and the blue blocks, the British, are approaching a point of intersection just west of the Great Sand Sea. Rossi, in his Fiat, decides to bank his formation to the left to begin the run back toward Libya. As he tilts his wings, he exposes the entire belly of his formation to the ground. For a few seconds, he is blindsided. "Now," Miller says softly in the control room, "Vector 040, maximum boost. Climb, climb, climb." "Tally-ho!" Artie's voice erupts over the radio, no longer a whisper, but a roar. "I see them. They're right above us, like sitting ducks." The Hurricanes drop their long-range tanks. The Merlin engines scream as the pilots slam the throttles forward. The heavy fighters tilt their noses up, trading their hidden speed for a sudden, violent surge of altitude. Rossi is mid-laugh, telling a joke to Tenente Bruno about a girl in Rome when the world explodes. He looks down. Coming out of the brown haze of the desert, appearing like ghosts conjured from the sand, are 12 British Hurricanes. They aren't manoeuvring. They aren't dancing. They are coming up like a wall of steel, their wings levelled, their guns already spitting fire. The trap has snapped shut. The Knights have been caught in the middle of their parade, and the system is about to collect its first major dividend. December 19th, 1940. 10-12 hours, 14,000 feet over the western desert. In the cockpit of his Falco, Giorgio Rossi's world undergoes a violent Newtonian shift. One moment, he is the master of a silent, golden kingdom. The next, the air around him is filled with lead rain. "Ambush!" Rossi screams into his mask, his voice cracking with the sudden spike of adrenaline. Break right. But a formation of 24 aircraft does not break instantly. It is a massive, drifting organism, and right now it is being dissected. The Hurricanes are not engaging in the mischia Rossi loves. They aren't trying to outturn him. They are performing a high-speed vertical slash, a tactic dictated by the very controllers who guided them here. Back in the dim silence of the Matru-controlled dugout, Flight Lieutenant Miller is hunched over the radio. He can hear the chaos, the roar of Merlin engines, the rhythmic thud of machine guns, and the panicked Italian chatter bleeding through the frequencies. On the plotting table, the markers are no longer moving in straight lines. They are a jumbled mess of blue and red wood. But Miller remains the invisible hand. "Blue leader, check your sig," Miller says, his voice a cool, clinical contrast to the screaming in Artie's ears. "You have 2 bandits coming around from the northeast. Turn to 080, now!" In the air, Artie West doesn't even look. He trusts the voice. He slams the Hurricane into a hard bank to the right. A second later, 2 Italian Fiats streak through the space he had just occupied, their tracer fire falling short. "Good call, Control," Artie yells. "I'm on them." This is the power of the coordination. In a traditional dogfight, a pilot's situational awareness is limited to the few hundred yards he can see through his canopy. He is a hunter with tunnel vision. But Artie is flying with the eyes of the radar. He knows where the Italians are before they even finish their manoeuvres. He knows where the reinforcements are. He knows which way the wind is blowing the smoke. Rossi, meanwhile, is fighting a ghost. He pulls his Fiat into a tight, beautiful loop, intending to drop onto the tail of a Hurricane. In a one-on-one duel, he would win. But as he reaches the apex of his loop, inverted and looking for his prey, the Hurricane isn't there. It has already dived away, guided by Miller to a different target. "Where are they?" Tenente Bruno's voice screams over the radio. "They hit and they disappear. They aren't fighting. They're just killing." The Italians are used to the Knight's Code, a visual engagement where you see your enemy, you engage, and you win through superior aerobatics. But the British have stopped playing. Under the guidance of the invisible hand, they are practicing energy management. The command, don't turn with them. The tactic, dive, fire all 8 guns for a 3-second burst, and use the speed to climb back out of reach. The result, the agile Fiats are left fluttering in the wake of the heavier Hurricanes, unable to catch them, unable to strike back. Rossi watches in horror as one of his wingmen, a boy no older than 20, tries to dogfight a Hurricane. The Italian pilot executes a perfect Immelmann turn, a masterpiece of flight school precision. But the British pilot doesn't follow the turn. He simply levels out, waits for the Italian to bleed off his speed at the top of the arc, and then, directed by a calm voice from 60 miles away, pumps 100 rounds of .303 caliber lead into the Fiat's exposed belly. The Italian plane doesn't just fall, it disintegrates. The fuel tank explodes in a gout of orange flame that looks wrong against the perfect blue of the sky. "Control, this is Red Leader," another British voice cuts through. "I've lost visual on the main swarm. Give me a vector." "Red Leader, Matru, come on to 330. You have 3 stragglers trying to head south. They are at your 10 o'clock, 2 miles. You have the sun behind you." Miller isn't just giving directions. He is providing tactical advantage. He is placing his pilots in the 6 o'clock high position with the sun at their backs, the ultimate predatory stance in aerial warfare. Rossi realizes with a sickening jolt in his stomach that he is no longer in a dogfight. He is in a slaughterhouse. He looks at his instrument panel. His oil pressure is dropping. A stray bullet must have nicked a line. He looks at his wings. They are riddled with holes. "Regroup," Rossi commands, his voice trembling. "Regroup on me. We are leaving." But the invisible hand isn't finished with them. As the Italians try to turn west toward the safety of their own lines, Miller sees the move on the radar screen. "Blue leader, red leader," Miller says, his thumb pressing the transmit button for the final time in this set. "They're running. Intercept them at grid square, zebra 2. Don't let them form up. Keep the pressure on." Artie West feels a grim sense of satisfaction. The fear and frustration of the last few months, the blind patrols and the Italian mockery, are being burned away in the heat of his guns. "Understood, Control," Artie says, his voice now as steady as Miller's. "We're on the net. We see them." The Hurricanes bank in unison, a coordinated pack of wolves guided by a central brain. They don't need to see the Italians yet. They know exactly where they will be. Down in the dugout, Ted Jenkins watches the green screen. The blips are merging, overlapping, and then, one by one, the red blips are simply vanishing. "It's working," Ted whispers. "God, it's actually working." The invisible hand has reached out across the desert and plucked the nights from the sky. December 19th, 1940, 10:25 hours. Near the Libyan border, the Wire. The sky over the desert border is no longer a place of sport. It has become an industrial killing zone. The Italians are fleeing in what they believe is a cloud of tactical smoke and confusion. But on the radar screens back at Matru, they are as clear as ink on white paper. The hurricanes of blue and red flights are closing the gap at 300 miles per hour, guided by vectors that lead them not to where the Italians are, but to where they must be to reach their home airfields. Artie West sees them again. They are struggling to form a defensive circle, the Cerchio Mazzatone, a classic Italian tactic where each biplane protects the tail of the one in front. In a slower, older war, this was an impenetrable fortress of machine guns. "They're bunching up," Artie says, his voice tight with anticipation. "They're trying the circle." "Control to blue leader," Miller's voice cuts in. "Don't play their game. Break the circle from above. Use your speed. Hit the lead aircraft and a zoom. I have another flight of gladiators coming in from the south to catch the levers." Artie smiles. It's a cold, hard expression. He pushes the Hurricane's nose down. The desert wire, the great barbed wire fence the Italians built to divide their colony from Egypt, passes beneath his wings like a thin, jagged scar. The Hurricanes dive in a finger-four formation. They aren't trying to be graceful. They are 8 tons of metal and lead falling from the sun. Capitano Giorgio Rossi is at the centre of the Italian circle. He looks up and sees the Hurricanes coming. He expects them to dive in, pull up into a turn, and begin the dance. He readies his muscles to yank the Fiat into a high G snap roll that will put him behind the British lead plane. But the Hurricanes don't pull up. They don't turn. They simply open fire from 600 yards. The concentration of fire from a Hurricane is a terrifying thing. Each aircraft carries 8 Browning machine guns, firing a combined total of 160 rounds per second. When 12 Hurricanes fire simultaneously, the air is filled with nearly 2,000 bullets every time the pilots twitch their fingers. Rossi watches in paralysed horror as Tenente Bruno's aircraft, the Silver Hawk he had admired only an hour ago, is literally erased from the sky. The heavy .303 rounds don't just poke holes, they shred the linen skin, shatter the wooden struts, and turn the delicate biplane into a cloud of confetti and jagged metal. Bruno never even had a chance to bank. "Bruno!" Rossi screams, but the radio is a wall of static and the screams of other dying men. The Hurricanes scream through the middle of the Italian circle like a freight train through a glass house. They don't stay to fight. By the time Rossi has levelled his wings to pursue, the British are already 2,000 feet above him, climbing back into the sun on the sheer momentum of their dive. This is the slaughter of the innocents. It isn't that the Italian pilots are bad, they are among the most courageous and skilled in the world. It's that they are fighting a ghost. They are trying to duel with a machine that is being operated by a man in a dugout 60 miles away. Every time the Italians try to regroup, a fresh pair of Hurricanes appears from a new mathematically perfect angle. "It's not fair," a voice wails over the Italian frequency. A young pilot, panicked and weeping. "Where are they coming from? They're everywhere. Rossi sees another Fiat catch fire. The pilot jumps, his white parachute blooming against the brown sand, but the desert is a cruel host to a downed man. Then another goes down, and another. The Italian formation shatters. The Knights are no longer a unit. They are individuals running for their lives. Rossi sees Artie West's Hurricane, identifiable by the V painted on its fuselage, diving directly for him. Rossi pulls a desperate, gut-wrenching turn. He uses every ounce of his skill, stalling the Fiat on the edge of a spin to let the Hurricane overshoot. In the old days, this would have been his moment. He would have slipped onto the British tail and finished him. But as Rossi levels out, expecting the Hurricane to be in front of him, he hears a new sound. Not the roar of an engine, but the whistle of wind. Artie West isn't there. He has already used his superior engine power to climb away, but someone else is there. A flight of British Gladiators, the older biplanes the Italians used to mock, dives in from the south. Guided by Miller, they have been positioned to catch the Italians exactly when they are most exhausted and distracted. The sky is a graveyard of silver wings. Rossi looks around and realizes he is alone. His squadron, the pride of the Regia Aeronautica, has been decimated. Out of 24 aircraft, he can only see 4 others still airborne, and they are all trailing smoke or banking wildly in terror. "Return to Gambut," Rossi whispers, his heart feeling like a lead weight in his chest. "All planes, if you can hear me, get out. Just get out." As he banks toward the west, Rossi looks back one last time. He sees the Hurricanes levelled off, circling like vultures, waiting for the next set of coordinates. They aren't chasing him. They don't need to. They have already broken the spirit of the Italian Air Force. The romantic era of the desert dogfight died in those 20 minutes over the wire. It wasn't ended by a better pilot, but by a better radio, a better grid, and a green glowing screen in a hole in the ground. Rossi crosses back into Libyan airspace, a broken man in a broken plane. Behind him, the invisible hand of British radar is already resetting the board for the next day's work. December 19th, 1940, 2100 hours, the officers' mess at El Adem. The mess tent is usually a place of boisterous laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the smell of rich tobacco. Tonight, it is a tomb. Capitano Giorgio Rossi sits at the end of a long wooden table, his hands wrapped around a glass of grappa he hasn't touched. Across from him are empty chairs, places where men like Tenente Bruno should be sitting, recounting their kills with wide gestures. Instead, there is only the sound of the wind snapping against the canvas. The report on the commander's desk is brutal. 14 aircraft lost, 8 pilots killed or missing. For the Regia Aeronautica, it isn't just a tactical defeat, it is a spiritual crisis. Rossi looks at his hands. They are still stained with the oil of his falco. He realizes now that the British didn't just bring better planes, they brought a better future. He had spent the last 3 months perfecting the art of the turn, the elegance of the loop, and the precision of the dive. He had trained to be a master of the 1918 sky. "They weren't even looking at us," Rossi mutters to the empty room. "They were looking at their instruments." He understands now that the Knights of the Air were an illusion. In the vastness of the desert, courage is a finite resource, but information is infinite. The British had turned the sky into a laboratory. They had stripped away the bravery of the individual and replaced it with the cold, unblinking eyes of the radar and the mathematical certainty of the grid. 80 miles to the east, the RAF operations tent at Martin Baigush. The mood here is different, but it is not celebratory. It is clinical. Artie West stands by the plotting table, watching a WAF airwoman wipe the red and blue markers from the map. The great trap is over. He is still wearing his flight suit. The salt from his sweat dried into white streaks across the fabric. Flight Lieutenant Miller walks in carrying a folder of decoded intercepts. He looks tired, but his eyes are bright. "The Italians are pulling their forward squadrons back to Tripoli," Miller says, sliding a paper across the table. "They're calling it a strategic realignment. In plain English, they're terrified. They think we have 500 fighters out there." "We only had 12, Artie says, shaking his head. 12 Hurricanes, 3 radar sets, and a dozen men with radios, Miller corrects him. "That's the secret, Artie. It's not about how many guns you have. It's about making sure every gun is in the right place at the right second." Artie looks at the empty map. He thinks about the Italian pilot he saw disintegrate over the wire. He thinks about the beautiful, useless manoeuvres the Fiats had tried to pull. "It's the end of the dogfight, isn't it?" Artie asks. Miller nods slowly. "The old kind, yes. From now on, the man who sees the other fellow first wins. And with radar, we see everyone." This victory in the desert was the proof of concept the RAF needed. The Dowding system, the integrated network of radar, ground control and radio, had been perfected in the Battle of Britain. But here, in the featureless wastes of Africa, it proved that geography no longer mattered. Science had conquered the desert. The Italians would eventually modernise. They would bring in faster Macchi fighters and German Messerschmitts. They would try to adapt. But the psychological blow of December 19th was permanent. The Hunnites had been unhorsed by an invisible foe. As the desert night deepens, Artie West steps out of the tent. He looks up at the stars. To anyone else, they are just points of light. To him, they look like a grid. He no longer sees the sky as a place of freedom. He sees it as a map to be managed, a problem to be solved. The era of the romantic ace is over. The era of modern, coordinated air power has arrived, and it was born in the dust and the green glow of a radar screen.